Hey, it's Jordan with the Young Turks, TYT Politics here in St. Louis, Missouri. How do I say it? Missouri?
Well, it depends on, if you're inside St. Louis, you might say Missouri. And if you're outside St. Louis, you might say Missouri. I use both. It's pretty cool.
Okay. Whatever the hell will let me stay here in peace. Been here for a few days. Obviously, if you've been paying attention, myself, Ty behind the camera, I believe 6 other journalists besides us, and 160 protesters were arrested 2 nights ago and spent 16 hours in jail. There are several people who spent quite a bit longer than 16 hours in jail. An update on that, I have reached out to the St. Louis City Police Department with some pretty straightforward questions. I've given them a deadline of 3 o'clock Central Time. Telling them that we plan on discussing their answers or non-answers on the Young Turks this evening. I've also reached out to the mayor of St. Louis. To her credit, or her office's credit, they have already responded to me just to get a little more background on 2 nights ago. So they tell me they'll be able to answer my questions by this afternoon. So I will update you, and the Young Turks will update you on those. But needless to say, obviously, it's not pleasant to be arrested, protesters or journalists, but what happened the other night, to me, is a lot bigger than just Ty or I getting arrested. It's a systematic, kind of just like your every other Tuesday. Like, this was not something special to the fine folks in St. Louis. This is something they've been dealing with, not just for the 2 weeks of this protest, but you're talking several decades, this kind of treatment. So we already have several videos up on youtube.com/TYT Politics. You could hear from me yesterday explaining what happened during our arrest. You could also watch previous interviews I've done in the last few days here. I'm here with Reverend Darryl Gray. You're a community leader here. You are someone I spoke with the other day, but I wanted to sit down and talk to you a little more. You were arrested about a week ago.
Right. This is my second arrest in 5 days. I was arrested. We went into one of the Cardinals games, and we dropped a banner simply just saying, "Stop killing black people." And coming out, we were encountered by several police officers, and one of the police officers grabbed one of the protesters, white female clergy, grabbed her and pushed her. And I stepped in front between them, and I asked him, "Why are you grabbing this person?" We've had a nonviolent demonstration. We've been nonviolent throughout. And he looked me right in the face and he said, "We are tired of this." He pushed me. He pepper sprayed me. And before I knew it, 3 officers had me on the ground, one with his knee in my back. They deliberately stepped on my glasses, and Friday night and early Saturday morning, I spent the night in jail. The initial charges were assaulting a police officer and resisting arrest. I received a summons the other day that said interfering with a police officer. So if interfering means I got in between a police officer who was unlawfully grabbing and pushing a protester or anyone, then I guess that's what I did.
And if you're as blind as me without glasses, you'd have to be pretty like a Rambo kind of guy to assault an officer without vision.
Well, the reality is, like I said, there were 15 of them, and my job with the protests has been to kind of go in the back. I've been kind of managing and coordinating security from behind the lines, and we were kind of ushering people up, and the police got between us. It's the first time that they've been able to do it. Unfortunately, they used cars in the intersection to move through. They were moving cars through. They did it on the pretense that they were monitoring the cars, but as the police stood in the intersection, their back was to the cars. They were facing the protesters, so they knew what they were doing, and they had been monitoring us, and so this was their opportunity. And my biggest concern was when the police officer looked at me and said, "We are tired of this." I'm just curious as to who the we are. Would the we be the police? Would the we be the government? Would the we be the business leadership in St. Louis? Who are the we that's tired of people who are demonstrating nonviolently exercising their constitutional right to speak out and speak against what we believe is a corrupt police department and an unjust governmental system, speaking out against the accumulation of wealth for the most wealthy as the poor continue to only get poorer. So this is more than just the Jason Stockley verdict. We believe that Jason Stockley should have been found guilty of murdering Anthony Lamar Smith. But it's greater than that, and thank goodness you have people on the front line like Bruce Franks and Corey Bush and John Muhammad and Amir Bradley and a host of others who came out of Ferguson who said, you know, enough is enough, and we'll do what we have to do to change the system.
I don't want to interrupt you, but sometimes we have new viewers who have no idea what the story's about. So, real quick, these protests have been going on here a little over 2 weeks. And this round of protests, obviously we've seen protests in Ferguson, Missouri, and elsewhere in the state. This round of protests came because former officer Jason Stockley, he was found not guilty of murdering a 24-year-old African-American named Anthony Lamar Smith. In 2011, Anthony Lamar Smith was backing out of a Church's Chicken parking lot. Officer Stockley and his partner were in that parking lot. They, according to them, suspected him of drug sales or something like that. Anthony Lamar Smith was trying to back out, backed into the officer, and a chase happened for about 3 miles. During that chase, Officer Stockley was heard on audio, very important, was heard on audio saying, "I'm going to kill this motherfucker. You watch. I'm going to kill this motherfucker. You watch." So right there, you have intent, you have motive, premeditation, all that. They get to the scene. Not Stockley, but his partner gets out of the car, approaches Lamar Smith's vehicle. Again, Lamar Smith, 24, African-American. And it looks from the video that the officer must have not felt threatened because he put his gun down. Then, on the other side, you have Stockley come out, start shooting 6 times, killed Anthony Lamar Smith, and then, I mean, I think amazingly, just went into Lamar Smith's vehicle after he was dead, does something, and the only DNA found on the gun in that vehicle was from the officer. Several years later, there was a delay. The officer was indicted and brought to trial for first-degree murder, I believe. Yes. First-degree murder. And in the judge's final case of his career, finds the officer not guilty, and subsequent protests. I want to move backwards for a second, because I think what's really important to this story is the history here, and predating another murder. Everybody knows the name Michael Brown. I think more of you now know Anthony Lamar Smith, but there's been, I mean, I don't know the number. We're talking hundreds of African Americans senselessly killed by police in many instances, like this judge, by the way, used. They said, oh, well, they were without conviction, by the way. They were dealing, things like that. They had a gun. The officer felt threatened. Can you kind of talk about just the history in St. Louis and the surrounding areas of African Americans getting killed by the police?
Well, just in the last year, we're talking about 8 within the last year, just 8. The circuit attorney, Kim Gardner, went before the Public Safety Committee just the other day and said that she has in her file at least 37 cases that can't even be investigated, that have not been investigated. The police say that they can't do the investigation because they haven't had the cooperation or the coordination from the circuit attorney. The circuit attorney has maintained, as the community has maintained, that police cannot police police. And so since Michael Brown, or even pre-Michael Brown, there have been dozens of police shootings that have gone uninvestigated, either for lack of resource or lack of will. The community feels it's more of a lack of will. And so what we're seeing historically is that police are protecting white communities and policing black communities, that they're going in heavy, they're going in quick, they're going in shooting, and unfortunately, black citizens, many of them unarmed citizens, are left in the street. That has been the history of St. Louis. That has been the history of the relationship between the police and the black community of St. Louis. And it's gotten to the point that you even have two different police unions in the city. You have the Ethical Association, Ethical Society of Police, which are the black police officers that are about 160 plus, and you have the Police Officers Association, which are about 900 and some police. So it's gotten so bad that black police officers had to distance themselves from the police union. And so
not to cut you off,
right,
but
that's
that's basically like forced segregation.
Exactly. Well, I mean, and they're doing it to protect themselves in so many ways. They've got to distance themselves in the eyes of the community as well. The Ethical Society was doing black police recruitment. They were doing black police training. And those police officers that were going through the ethical program, we found in community policing, were better police, particularly in black communities. White police officers won't get out of their cars. They will not engage and interact. And so you've got the killings, you've got the shootings, you've got what many in the community have claimed as police corruption, with police knowing, who's doing the crime, and that is entrenched in the culture of St. Louis police. And so the community's gotten to the point where it is said, and Missouri is a different place, where you can get guns pretty easily. And I would suspect that the community is afraid of the police. The police is afraid of the community. You've got a community that's not being protected by police and has gotten to the point where they're saying, do we have to protect ourselves? It is chaos. And it is chaotic in a community, our community, that's gotten to the point where violence has become normalized, that we're not coping. We're dealing with things ourselves. We're dealing with confrontation ourselves. And that's unfortunate because we're dealing in communities too often, communities of poverty, communities of economic depravity, economic depression, where violence and the threat of violence has become the norm, and we've gotten conditioned to our conditions, and that's become just as real. And so you put all that together, and it is a recipe for not only despair and depression, but disaster and destruction. And so frontline protesters have said that enough is enough. Michael Brown, out of Michael Brown, we got this new civil rights movement through Black Lives Matters and Hands Up United and so many other things. But what Anthony Lamar Smith did is it took the Michael Brown push and effort and energy, and the organizers that were in Ferguson that came out of Frontline, they are a more strategic thinker. And so when they came out after the verdict, the protest was directed towards the economy of St. Louis. And it's a page right out of the Montgomery bus boycott, where Dr. King and the Montgomery Improvement Association said, let's boycott the buses for over a year because our dime is the same as somebody else's dime. The business leaders went to the government leaders, and the business leaders told the government leaders, it's affecting our business, it's affecting the economy, so change the law. And that's what Frontline is saying right now. They're saying to the business leaders that you need to go to the government leaders and change the law. And that's where we are right now.
I want to talk a little bit about the history because from what I've heard, I had 16 hours to get the history in a jail cell, which, by the way, I mean, I'm not making this about me, but there are very big concerns about journalists who have been arrested here at Standing Rock, in Ferguson, and beyond for simply covering protests, which is protected under the First Amendment. So you'll be hearing a lot more from myself and the Young Turks about that. But it seems to me like you talk about a rigged system that's been talked about during the campaign, Bernie Sanders, all that. It seems like St. Louis, Missouri, kind of created this rigged government to modern day segregate. You had white flight and all these things, but it seems like they created like St. Louis City, St. Louis County, all these things that it's very complicated even for me to understand. But essentially to have one government for middle class to wealthy white people, and leave the African Americans over there to figure it out for themselves. Can you kind of talk about that?
Well, I mean, that has become the reality. You look at what people classify as the Del Mar divide, that south of Del Mar you have affluency, north of Del Mar you have poverty.
And Del Mar is like a main road here?
Del Mar is a main street, and it runs, ironically, it runs east and west. But like I say, south of it, that's the other irony. On the south side, we have the affluency. The mayor lives on the south side. It's old money on the south side, and it's no money on the north side. The north side has poverty level. I would say that 65–70% of families live in poverty. It is a high crime geographical area as a result of that poverty. It has the highest number of African American school suspensions, second in the country, outside of Florida. It is number one in violent crime. It ties with Chicago. It is number one in murder per capita over Chicago. So those become the realities. Mass incarceration. When we talk about mass incarceration in Missouri, and particularly in St. Louis, the two jail cells, the workhouse and the justice center that we were in, are overcrowded right now. 80 to 85% are African American males, many of them who are there because they can't post bond for nonviolent crimes. And so you're absolutely right. When we looked at following Michael Brown and we began to investigate what was going on in Ferguson and other municipalities in St. Louis County, the speed traps, the fact that in predominantly black municipalities you have predominantly white police departments. And so, and most of these municipalities are people who live below the poverty line. So you are already, now you're taxing, and now you're racially taxing through the speed traps, through black people, being pulled over for driving while black. All of these things now, you're adding insult to injury. People who are already living in poverty and now have got to be racially taxed through police departments, through arbitrary traffic violations. And so you're given a ticket that you can't pay. You go to court knowing that you can't pay it. If you can't pay it, you go to jail, but then you can't post bond. So you don't have the money to pay the ticket. You don't have money for court costs. You don't have money to pay bond, and now you're in jail waiting for trial. So if you had a job, you've lost your job. You can't find a job. All of these things are systematically created, we believe, to maintain the status quo, to keep poor people poor, and to continue to feed into a system where those who control the system continue to get wealthy from poverty. Bernie Sanders talks about it all the time.
Well, listen, I'm a white guy. I've been detained, but I never was arrested overnight, so that was the first. But I was just looking at the lineup, not even for the people arrested. I was looking at people who were in the jail and, processed and were staying there for whatever reason. I don't want to be dramatic, but just looking at it, it looks like modern-day slavery to me. Because it's a system, and Ty could talk about this a lot better than I. He did a documentary on bail reform and all this. It's a system that essentially, after the slaves were freed, they arrested them in mass to keep labor.
That's right.
And it seems to me that a lot of these systems are being essentially privatized to keep the poor who cannot pay the bonds in prison.
Well, we've talked about this. There have been many documentaries, and you said Ty has done his own documentary. Mass incarceration is modern day slavery. That's just it. And we can try to explain it away, but it's really not that complicated. Believe it or not, it's just really that simple. And that's why when Bernie Sanders talks about criminal justice reform, and I had an opportunity to coordinate Senator Sanders coming to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference national convention in Baton Rouge, where he unveiled his criminal justice platform to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, Dr. King's organization. And so he's made it very clear. There have been others who have made it very clear that unless we begin to deal with criminal justice reform and start with the reality of mass incarceration and the fact that most African American men who are in prison today are there for non-violent crimes. I call them crimes of economics. Young men, older men, black men who have said, we've got to feed our families. We've got to eat. And so there's got to be a way to deal with that, but you're absolutely right. We can't deal with it as long as we have business leaders tied to government leaders who say, how can we make more money? How can we make money through government? How can we make money using government? How can we make money in the prison system? The government is going to have to, the government makes legislation as it relates to criminal justice. The government makes legislation as it relates to how our penal system operates, be it publicly operated or privately operated. The government continues to say that we want to get out of the business of prisons. But the government will never get out of the business of prisons because even if you privatize it, there's got to be legislation that deals with it. Lobbyists will determine how we run our penal systems. Corporations who build prisons, corporations who will be responsible for training correctional officers and maintaining correctional officers will determine the legislation. That is the reality. And so we are going to go back. So plantation owners and overseers, the modern day plantation owners and overseers will determine the modern day penal system. And it will be to their benefit, and it will be to the detriment of black people and brown people and poor white people.
Mm. And you know, I think a lot of people, first of all, to the St. Louis PD or any PD, if you want to rough up journalists, be careful because we could see things in the jail that you probably don't want to come out. So a lot of people probably know this already, but I've never spent a night in jail overnight, so this was very eye-opening for me. You had officers hurling racial slurs at arrestees. I saw officers hurling homophobic slurs at arrestees. Interestingly to me, which I don't know if it's standard procedure in St. Louis PD, but two trans men, an officer said, I don't know what they are, right, and just tossed them in some separate cell from everybody else, which is, besides dehumanizing, legally very blurry, and they were withholding medication. So we had somebody in my cell, young man, depression, anxiety. Frankly, there are some mental disorders that if you miss one dose, you're at risk for psychosis. And he was banging on the window, and begging, really, for 14 hours for medication. In response, they took him out and put him in solitary confinement.
That's right.
When I was getting let out, I asked him, have you gotten your medication? He said no, and now they're transferring me somewhere else. So, talking to some of you, this is just your average Tuesday. But people should know that besides the legal aspect, there is just a deep-rooted, almost like we were talking before, it seems to me these police officers in many ways are getting off on this dehumanization. Well,
I mean, you look at a place like Missouri, and we've said that St. Louis has become the new Selma. Missouri has become the new South. And when I say the new South, I don't mean that the new Atlanta South. I'm really talking about the new old Montgomery South, the new old Selma South, the new old Jackson, Mississippi, or Natchez, Mississippi South. That's the South. I'm talking about it's becoming the new 50 South. And that's become real. But how do you do that? How do you scare people? How do you establish fear and intimidation? You do it through police. I mean, that's always been the case. And so the police that are being recruited, the mental health background check is not adequate. They're not being evaluated based upon implicit bias or concerns of implicit bias. You're getting, and don't get me wrong, we're not anti-police. Our movement is not anti-police, but our movement is anti-bad police, anti-corrupt police. And so we're very clear about that. But if you are not doing a proper assessment of police officers, if you are not trying to recruit police officers from the communities that you say you want to serve, and we're talking specifically the black community, Chief Dotson stopped a black recruitment program. He stopped the program. We want the mayor to reinstitute that program. Now, there is some conversation. Why? Because we believe it's healthy. But we go back to the recruitment. They're recruiting from the so far out of St. Louis, out in the, not even the suburbs. We're talking about rural Missouri. Recruiting from places where white people have never seen black people except television. And so they don't know. They don't know how to interact. They don't know how to engage. They don't know that if a black person raises their voice, it's not because they're becoming violent or aggressive. That's just how we're just passionate. We just roll that way. When we talk with our hands.
That's what my cameraman that I have to yell at all the time because he's making me deaf is saying.
But that's exactly what he's saying. That's how we roll. Even when we talk with our hands. It doesn't mean we're being aggressive. It means that's just how we roll. And so these are just simple things. But you went back to the Jason Stockley thing. The judge, Timothy Wilson, who will be retiring, said in his final statement when he acquitted Jason Stockley, he said that in his years on the bench, in his over 30 years on the bench, what he has observed, that an urban heroin drug dealer without a gun would be an anomaly.
He was never convicted of being a drug dealer, by the way.
And he wasn't. And what we submit, which is what the judge should have also submitted, from Baltimore to Chicago to Detroit to Flint to other urban areas, it would be an anomaly for a police officer not to drop a gun on a suspect, not to drop drugs on a suspect. Those things are real. And so it showed the bias of the judge in this particular case on how this judge and other judges see urban residents. Suspected. He should have said suspected urban drug dealer. Suspected. And so that's what we're dealing with throughout the criminal justice system in St. Louis.
And I just want to point out, full disclosure, I don't know the whole story, but I heard about it in jail. You probably know. I mean, we know we have two legal systems, one for wealthy people, one for poor people. But Anheuser-Busch, kind of like the father of St. Louis,
that's right,
if you like your beer. The grandson, I believe. The grandson was arrested for some pretty outrageous behavior, and he got off twice, I believe. This happens all the time with, well-connected, wealthy people, even wealthier black people sometimes, but mostly wealthy white people that get off. Yet this judge, who, by the way, if you come into this late, the officer who got acquitted was on tape. I'm going to kill this motherfucker. You watch. And he did. A couple minutes later. And he got off. So, I mean, it's not just a race thing. If you got the money, if you're connected, if you're the grandson to an oligarch, you're going to be okay, no matter what you do. And I think the chickens are coming home to roost because, I think St. Louis PD and other police departments, Baltimore, this and that, have been able to operate with impunity. But I see from your protest movement, what I think is interesting is, Cori Bush, you have said, we're not going to be violent, but we're not here to be peaceful. That's right. We want to disrupt. Can you talk a little more of that?
Well, I know in the beginning, Tory Russell, who was one of the lead organizers, Bruce Franks, Cori Bush, and others, said, listen, there will be civil disobedience. There will be civil disruptions. There will be civil disturbances. But we will be nonviolent. But we won't promise you that we will be peaceful. This protest has disturbed the peace and tranquility of St. Louis. Those who thought that they could just continue to do, as you said, get away with business as usual. The police association put up $1 million bond. That was real. This case was not supposed to go to court. 6 years later, it wasn't supposed to go. A young man by the name of Anthony Shahid through the Sunshine Act, forced the government to give up additional information and brought another videotape to the circuit attorney's office. It was Anthony Shaheed that really brought this to light, but what he brought to light is something that we've known for a long time, that if you're poor in St. Louis, you have no rights, period. You do have the right to remain silent, which means you have the right not to protest. You have the right not to demonstrate. You have the right not to shake the tree. You've got that right, and in St. Louis, what they're telling folk, you probably should exercise that right and be silent.
AKA, also known as a authoritarian dictatorship.
Well, I mean, that's the reality. If you look at it, just like Selma, there are a group of business people who dictate what takes place in St. Louis. That's the reality. You had 5 families in Selma. You've got a handful of families here in St. Louis who say, this is how we want St. Louis to be. This is what we're trying to sell to St. Louis. We lost the football team because of it. But these are the same people who are connected with the hockey team. These are the same people who are connected with the baseball team. These are the same people who are connected with money in St. Louis. These are the same people that make a living off of the city of St. Louis but live in other places. Mm-hmm. And that's why the protesters have decided that we're going to confine our protest to the Central Corridor. We're not taking it to the black community. It's not going to be another Ferguson. We're not trying to burn stuff up. That's not the point. But we are going to disrupt. And we are going to disrupt what this group of people hold near and dear to them. That's their wallet. Mm-hmm. And our hope is the same thing will happen in St. Louis as happened in Montgomery, where at some point, after $1 million of the economy has been disrupted, at some point, the financial dictatorship, the oligarchy, will say, listen, government leaders, we're giving you permission to change the rules. We're giving you permission to change the law. Mm-hmm. We're giving you permission to do that. And that's where we are right now. And Bruce Franks and Cori Bush and Amir Bradley and Tori Russell and Melissa McKenzie and a host of others have made it very clear that they're not going to stop. And as clergy and representing many clergy in this city who support the protesters, we're here not to lead Frontline. We're here to support Frontline. We're here to stand beside them, to protect them in whatever way we can. And we get our share of threats, too. Cori Bush is a target now.
Cori Bush, by the way, is a congressional candidate. She's on one of the Justice Democrat candidates. Young African-American woman, and she's been very instrumental in these protests.
Oh, she's key. She's one of the key leaders, Bruce Franks. These are people now who are going to become targets. And I'm not talking about just political targets. They're going to become targets. I mean, I've gotten my share of threats. They've threatened me. I've been threatened personally. My wife has been threatened. It's interesting that we have to go to the same police department that we're now challenging. And we have to feel some level of comfort or confidence, at least, that they might do something. But the reality is that the people who are threatening me might be police. The people who are threatening me might be part of federal government. The people who are threatening me might be one of the many 22 white supremacist groups in the state of Missouri. Or it may be disgruntled black establishment people who are saying, Gray, you're pushing too much. Dr. King's father said to Dr. King, do this gradually. You're going too fast. Gradualism. But Frontline, they're not going to do this gradually because we have too many people in jail. We have too many people living in poverty. We have too many black kids being suspended because they're black. We have too many problems.
Well, also, you're not getting killed gradually. Usually the bullets kill pretty quickly.
Well, like I said, eight just in this year, 30-plus cases the file hasn't even been opened, and many more that are coming every day. So that's where we are.
I want to bring Ty into this real quick, but before I do that, I just want to stress something because I think it's important. President Trump, I don't need to do a report. We know he's emboldening these police. We know that the police basically have carte blanche to do whatever the hell they want. He has actually said, don't be so nice to these protesters. However, this is not, it's not like St. Louis was peachy on January 19th. It's not like Detroit or any of these other places with this severe police brutality were peachy before Trump. And we should also stress a lot of these things are happening with Democrat representation. The mayor of St. Louis, she's not been in office that long, but she's a Democrat. One of the major senators, Claire McCaskill, from people I've spoken with, hasn't done much about not only the police brutality here, but the poverty. The poverty. She seems to represent people that donate to her campaign, not so much the African Americans. Democrat, a lot of these police unions are heavily influenced by Democratic politicians. So when you have a racist, extremist Republican Party and a neoliberal, indifferent to what's going on Democratic Party, you really don't, it's kind of like pick your poison. You want to get shot in the head or the privates. Can you kind of talk about that in terms of the failure of political leadership among the people, the party that says we represent the working class?
Well, I think that you've hit the nail on the head. And we can start with Senator McCaskill. And she has received a very lukewarm response from the African American community here in Missouri.
Up for re-election next year, by the way.
Right. And I serve on the executive committee of our progressive caucus for the Missouri Democratic Party. And we had to create a progressive caucus because we were not feeling that the Missouri Democratic Party was fulfilling the needs of its constituents, Democratic constituents. And so you're absolutely right. But not only Claire McCaskill, we have a black sitting congressman here in the 1st Congressional District, Lacy Clay. Lacy Clay has not served us any better than Claire McCaskill has, and he's black. And I tell people, just because you're black doesn't make you family. And so you've got Claire McCaskill, who's a Democrat. You've got Lacy Clay, who's a Democrat. But if you're talking about the 1st Congressional District, it's 67% black. It's the city of St. Louis. It's St. Louis County. Both St. Louis County and the city of St. Louis has a majority black constituency. We have a black congressman. So why do we continue to have all these problems, and why are we not talking about it? Why isn't, we can talk about Claire McCaskill, but why isn't Lacy Clay talking about it? So the onus is on both, and both of them have to be targets in the midterm election. And targets, political targets. And so even with Frontline, what Frontline decided to do last Sunday is start voter registration, so that we let Claire McCaskill and Lacy Clay and Mayor Lyda know that we understand that the power is economic, but the power also comes in the vote. So we're going to be registering people to vote so that Claire McCaskill understands that whatever votes that we gather, Lacy Clay needs to know whatever votes we gather, the mayor needs to know whatever votes we gather will go to candidates who are supporting the issues that we're talking about, criminal justice reform, or dealing with issues of poverty, that we're going to deal with them. They're going to be charged with dealing with them, or those votes will either go for them or those votes will go against them. And you're right, these are Democrats. And we do have to focus on Democratic so-called leadership just as much as we have to focus on the lack of leadership or the lack of compassion or caring from Republicans. It goes both ways.
I want to bring Ty in. Obviously, he's got some experience, more so than I would, particularly on bail reform, on the kind of privatization scheme that makes up the prison system, which disproportionately affects African Americans. I also want to touch on the fact that, hey, when you look at the police system here, it seems like a huge jobs program is keeping black people in.
I think it's especially here in St. Louis, you guys, just the same thing that you were talking about with so many people are in jail right now for nonviolent crimes. They have tickets that they can't pay. That's $50 or $60. And then what happens is they go in jail and even if they are able to set up a plan, what happens is nothing goes to the principal. What they start doing is adding these taxes and fees, and you're always caught up in the system. If you somehow get on house arrest, that's a privatized system. So what happens, the same thing happens if you don't, you have to pay a fine also to be on house arrest. You have to pay for monitoring to be on house arrest. You have to make sure that you pay for, it's a whole lot of things that go into paying for all these things that's not owned. It's not by the government. It's all privatizations. All these cameras you guys have around here that I've been seeing, and I was wondering. I'm like, are those? I thought they were the cameras. Like if you cross the light, you get they send you the ticket. But those are cameras for the police to see what you're doing. That's right. That's a private company. That's right. That people are paying for. They're trying to privatize everything, where then it becomes about, because those contracts, what happens when you privatize something like a prison, they sign a contract that you have to have a certain amount of people in that jail. If you don't, they have to make up that. And so what happens is so now we have an incentive to give tickets. You don't pay these tickets, so we target poor people, because if you can't pay a ticket, we then take your license away. We take your license away. We're going to force you that, especially if you have a job. We're going to force you then to have to break the law, because you got to get to work. We're going to catch you doing that. And once we do, now we're going to put you in jail. And now you can't get out of jail because you don't have the money. You're sitting there. And a lot of times, if you're not savvy and you're not up on the law and understanding what's your due process, and obviously you don't have money for a lawyer, so you have a public defender, and that public defender more than likely will tell you to waive your right to a speedy trial. And once you waive your right to a speedy trial, then you're stuck. Because now, I need to get some more evidence. I need to do all this. And now you're sitting there. It's so many people in jail right now that have not been convicted of anything, still waiting to go to court, because things are getting pushed back, and it's years. And they're losing homes, they're losing houses, they're losing homes, they're losing jobs. And then if they are able to get out, they're put in an environment that they're stuck. Their back is against the wall, and no one is going to go hungry. So it forces them into this life. You know what I'm saying?
But that's the thing that people don't get, Ty. It is a process for these guys. You get a ticket for whatever. You can't pay the ticket. Let's say because you can't pay the ticket, you don't go to court. You don't go to court, you get a warrant. So now if you get another ticket or anything, now they arrest you. Now you've got the ticket, you've got a warrant, you got court fees. Now you've got to pay the fine for missing court. And so now you go to jail. You got 5 different things now that you can't pay. So now you wait. You said it right. Public defender says, just plead. So you go in and you plead for whatever. You come back out. You still have to pay restitution. Yeah. How are you going to do that? I have talked to people who their life of crime started. And when I say life of crime, I'm still talking about, I don't condone crime at all. Yeah. But their life of crime started as a result of not being able to pay traffic tickets. Not being able to pay traffic tickets, your life of crime has begun.
And just to point out what he talked about, a plea bargain. What they do when she spoke earlier is that you end up having 5 or 6 charges, and then what they do, it's almost like it's the same scenario as what you said earlier, Jordan, with them taking your glasses while you're in jail. Psychological damage. So if you're in jail and they're telling you, you're thinking, okay, I need to get out, I have a job, I need to do all this, and they're like, you got 5 charges, we don't know what's going to happen. Look, they offered you this plea. You can take this and get out tomorrow. That's right. You can take this and get out tomorrow, then go about your business. They take that plea, get out tomorrow, they go about their business. All of a sudden, something else happens, they get caught up. Oh, you had that other charge. Right. So now you either don't have a bail, or your bail is so high, definitely so high, because of that previous charge that you probably didn't even do, what they did is just pressure you and put you in a corner to make you plea just so that you can get out. But more than likely you probably didn't do the crime, and now since you did a plea for that, you're guilty of that. So now that you're arrested again, they use that against you. Mm-hmm. And so in addition to whatever thing you did, it's going to be in concert with that previous crime. So now, instead of, you're going to get 5 to 6 years, you know what I'm saying, instead of something that you probably could have got probation on because of previous crime. And then that's what started it. It all started from a traffic ticket. Right. You know what I'm saying? And being forced to plead. Because no one is going to get, no one is going to have a job, have things going well with them, and because they have a warrant for maybe a failure to appear,
that's right,
that they're going to say, okay, I'm going to just ride this out. No, you're going to try to get out because you want to live a life, a positive life. You have a job. You understand the system and the circumstances around wherever you're living. You're like, I want to stay in this positive lane. So you're going to plead to get out.
Right.
No, it's all a way to just keep you in the system. Right.
And that's what it is. And that becomes our reality. We visited the workhouse and we've talked to folk, but we've also talked to lawyers. See, that's the other thing people need to know. This is just not a one-sided conversation. We've talked to public defenders. And a public defender told me as early as yesterday, late as yesterday, Reverend Gray, we have to triage our cases. And I said, what? He said, yeah, we have to triage our cases. And so, because I was asking him, how deep is your caseload?
Yeah.
And he said, well, my caseload is pretty big, which means that I've got to make sure that, quote unquote, the most serious, that's what I've got to give the most attention to. And the other cases, I've got to deal with them as I can.
And most
As
of them,
I can.
And most of them they see day of court
Right.
when they meet their client.
Exactly.
Right?
But even the frustration, you think about that, somebody who's in jail, regardless of the crime, and we're talking about petty crimes, but the frustration and the sense of hopelessness and helplessness that they must feel, that even with this attorney, court appointed or otherwise, I still don't have adequate representation. In the streets, we don't have adequate representation. In government, we don't have adequate representation. And so it is continuous. It is continuous. Everywhere we go, we are not represented adequately.
Yeah.
Be it business, be it government, be it the justice system, and that stigma becomes attached. And so when it's attached to daddy, it's attached to children, it's attached to the family. And so this is more insidious than and deeper than people think. And it's not going to be discussed completely, in a show, in one show. And so we continue to chip away at it. But I always go back to front line. And that's exactly what it means. It means that on this front line, right now, they're prepared to deal with it. And the thought process is where St. Louis goes, so does the rest of the country.
Yeah.
And that's where we are. Michael Brown brought it out. The death of Anthony Lamar Smith brought it out. But they continue to call the road. They continue to talk about Tamara Rice and Sandra Bland and Eric Gardner and Walter Scott. And they keep doing it. And Trayvon Martin. They continue to remind people. They continue to remind people that this is not just St. Louis, but St. Louis is, you look at St. Louis, once again, you see what's happening all across the country.
Yeah.
From police, excessive use of force, police brutality, police murders, mass incarceration, poverty, you name it. And we're not trying to just talk about the problem, Ty. What we're trying to make people understand is that there are solutions. And so we need to begin to talk about solutions. And I guess for me, the last thing is, these are young people. These are people who are creative thinkers. Even though the blueprint from a foundation point of view is still very civil rights, these young folk are being very strategic in what they do.
Yeah.
They are.
I was very impressed.
And they're not to be taken for granted.
Yeah.
And you just can't appease them the way that you were able to appease establishment black leaders a year ago.
Yeah.
Not 10 years ago, but a year ago. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
And so the mayor can't just come out, or the governor can't just come out and say, oh, we're going to give you A, B, and C, and let's call it a day. You can't give these young people an 18-month pilot program and say, is that enough? Because it's not. Because they don't want to keep coming back in 18 months, 24 months, begging again, scratching again, fighting again.
Exactly.
And so what they want are answers and solutions that are sustainable, that are long-term. And so, I admire them, but you're absolutely right on what you say. If we don't focus on poverty, and next year is the 50th anniversary of Dr. King's Poor People's Campaign. So next year, I know there are a lot of things that are going to be geared around that from a lot of national organizations. But you'll find with these young people, from Michael Brown up until now, a lot of it has been local leadership, regional leadership. They're not tied into the national figures. You've noticed that since Mike Brown. And so when we talk about Young Turks and what Young Turks are doing, when we talk about what Justice Democrats are doing, when we talk about Our Revolution and some of these other groups that have come up from the Bernie movement, that happened out of Ferguson. Around the country, Baltimore, and we saw the Freddie Gray situation, and how young people push people like Jamal Bryant and say, listen, we appreciate you being here, but whoa, either you're going to stand beside us or you're going to stand behind us. So they're telling traditional black leadership, if you haven't led, then you need to follow, or you need to get out of the way. So that's what Frontline's been doing. It's been phenomenal. It's been encouraging. It's been inspiring. To watch these young folk do
it. It has, man. And I want to pose a question that one of the comments I was reading, and I know the answer to, but I would like you to just elaborate on why not walk on the sidewalk. Why not protest on the sidewalk?
Creative tension. Dr. King called it creative tension. You've already heard it. I'm a disciple of Dr. King. I think that what Dr. King and Abernathy and Mama Rosa and others did, and Johnny McCard and Montgomery, what these brothers and sisters did, man, was just, come on, man. That's why we can do this. And they were in the street. If somebody said Dr. King never did the highway, yes, he did. There's several actions where Dr. King went to the highway. And so we've got to create this tension right now, because unfortunately that's the only thing that they're going to respond to.
Exactly.
We're saying to our young folk, many in the room, who are saying, we got some Malcolm philosophers, people who follow Malcolm, and they're like, we're going to take matters into our own hands. We're trying to avoid that. And so, but if we just walk on the sidewalk, then those young brothers and sisters out here who don't subscribe to Dr. King's philosophy, say, y'all just handkerchief headwind, Uncle Tom, scratching, skinning, and grinning, and this is not going to do anything if you're not going to push them. If you're not going to give some serious tailwind to this, then nothing is going to happen. And so we've got to let people know that we're prepared to sacrifice ourselves and put ourselves in harm's way. I'd rather go to jail twice in a 5-day period than another black man or black woman get shot. And that's what Frontline's saying. We're prepared to put ourselves, our bodies. I'm a pastor. I've been a pastor 35 years. And there's a passage of scripture in Romans 12 that says, make your body a living sacrifice. That's what Dr. King was. Malcolm, saying that I'm going to present my body as a living sacrifice. And so that's where we are. And that's why we have to be in the streets. If we're on the sidewalk, there's no pressure, there's no tension, there's no sense of urgency. These are urgent times. And if we don't understand that these are urgent times, and urgent times call for things that to some people may seem desperate, well, when you have to sit with a mother or a father whose son was shot 5 times, one bullet was 6 inches from him. As Jordan said, the partner put his gun up. The partner was closest. The partner was on the driver's side. He put his gun up, but the other one continued to shoot several times with one shot 6 inches, the kill shot. I mean, come on, man. This is real. And so if we put our bodies on the street, on the front line, then these young brothers who have no fear, these young sisters who have no fear, and they're carrying We're keeping them off the street. We're keeping them out of the street.
Yeah.
See, that's what people don't understand. We go to the street so that they don't have to.
Yeah.
Because when they come out on the street, they're coming locked and loaded.
Yeah.
And they have no fear. So that's what we're trying to avoid.
Yeah. And you know, that's one of the things I was trying to tell the red shirts when we were in jail, because we had one asshole that didn't give us water for 5 hours.
That's right.
And we were sitting in the cell that didn't have any water, and no one could get water, and we didn't get water for 5 hours. Right. And we were banging on the door trying to get water, and then he finally had to open the door for something, and we were like, "Can we please have water?" And he was like, "Yes." And so we're complaining, like, "Why wouldn't you give us water?" And he said, "Well, hey, the human body can survive 3 days without water. Welcome to jail." And I told him, I said, "You know what? We're in jail for you." Right. Because Freddie Gray could be you.
That's right.
That could be you. So while you sitting here and you're being an asshole for people that's putting their lives on the line, their freedom on the line, is for you.
That's right.
The reason why we're not walking on the street, because that is too comfortable. I don't want you to honk your horn at me and agree with me why you drive past.
That's right.
I want to stop you. I want to make it uncomfortable for you. I want to make you miss work, and hopefully you get your ass out the car and jump in with me, because it could be anyone.
That's right.
It really doesn't matter. And if you don't see that, I'm so sorry for you. I'm so sorry for you.
But the reality is, you look at it, it was just a few weeks ago where Officer Milton Green was shot by police officer Milton Green was shot by a white officer. Milton Green was off duty, and he was shot by another police officer, and the police chief called it friendly fire. It was just recently, a few Sundays ago, where an undercover police officer in the protest riot, with the police riot, undercover with a mask on, was kettled, got on the ground, complied with the police, and got beat up. Undercover police. He couldn't say he was undercover because he couldn't blow his cover. They didn't know he was undercover. They just saw him as a black man, and they beat his ass. These things are real. Harriet Tubman freed over 1,000 slaves. The question was asked to her, "Miss Tubman, how come you didn't free more?" And she said, "I could have freed more slaves, but they didn't know they were slaves." The same guy you talked to, he doesn't know he's a slave. Yep. I talked to a police officer when I was getting arrested.
So conditioned.
That's right. When I was getting arrested Friday night, and the police officer that had my arm, and I told him that my arm was injured from a sports injury, he raised it higher. I said, "I'm out here for you." Black police officer. Yeah. He said, "You're not out here for me." We're fighting for black police officers to get the recognition they deserve, to get the promotions that they deserve. Right now in the city of St. Louis, there are 19 openings, promotion openings for police sergeants. There are 7 black police officers right now who are qualified for those 7 jobs. We're pushing for those 7 officers to get those sergeant stripes, because we need those type of supervisors on the street. There's 1 lieutenant and 1 captain who right now are up for promotion. We're pushing for them to get those promotions, because we need those. These guys are solid guys. We need them inside. We need them supervising other officers. We're pushing for the black recruitment program. We're pushing for more money for police officers. We're pushing. We just want a better policeman, a better policewoman.
Yeah.
I don't give a damn if they're black or white.
Yeah, absolutely.
We just want them to be better. And so that becomes the issue. So when a black officer, but that's why I said to Jordan, because you're black don't make you family.
Exactly.
Because you got white police officers out there who will treat you much better than a black one, but we get it. We understand the blue wall of silence. We understand the police culture. But we also understand that in St. Louis, there is a police culture that is so corrupt. That's the issue. You can't change the police culture if you don't deal with corruption.
Yep.
I mean, it's not just the racism. There's the greed too. You got a lot of stuff going on.
Yeah.
And so it is a reflection of the society in which we live in.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, you're absolutely right. But until the police chief acknowledges that there's racism within the police force. He's got to acknowledge that.
Yeah.
Not just racism, police against community, but within his department, police on police racism. Come on, man, we're not stupid.
Yeah.
And so these are the things that have to happen. When the chief of police, after he kettled everybody that Sunday night and arrested journalists and arrested a Air Force lieutenant colonel who was just out after beating up a police officer, after all of that, and then he comes out and says in a press conference, these are our streets. Whose streets? Our streets. The police officer said, our streets that we own the night? You say that after all of this? Where's your head at?
Yeah, arrogance.
And then you wonder why your police officers do what they do, because they already know I got to get out of jail free card.
Yeah.
Because it's sanctioned by the chief. It's sanctioned indirectly by the mayor. It's sanctioned by the governor who wanted to bring National Guard in the day of the Stockley verdict. It's sanctioned by this president. So all the way up the chain of command, it's sanctioned that we get a get out of jail free card, that there's a bounty on Negroes. Come on, man.
Yeah.
So that's where we are. This is the new Selma. And frontline protesters are the new SCLC. They're the new NAACP. They're the new SNCC. These frontline guys.
Yeah.
They're the new core.
Yeah.
And they're all wrapped into one, because if you look at frontline and you think about those four organizations, they got some of everything up in there.
Yeah.
They got some James Farmer up in there. They got some Dr. King up in there. They got some Malcolm X up in there. They got some Daisy Bates up in there.
Yeah.
They got some Rosa Parks. They got some Angela Davis up in there. In frontline.
Yeah.
Yeah. All of those organizations roll into one.
Yeah.
And they're not scared, because a scared Negro will get you killed.
I heard that. Yeah.
One more question, because I know you got to do things. Can you talk about the workhouse jail? There's a workhouse jail, which I still don't understand the name behind it, but from discussions last night, a majority of people in there are in there, not overnight, ongoing, without charges. I was also told that since it was built so long ago, there's not air conditioning for at least the male side. Right. Can you kind of talk about that?
Well, we had an opportunity. Alderman John Collins Muhammad invited me and Tory Russell to visit. It was prior to them actually putting in the fans. We're talking about 98, 100-degree temperature. As you said, in a building that has no ventilation. And so the only air that they can get is recycled hot air from the big fans that they bring in. And so we went up and visited. And first of all, it's overcrowded. You've got a workhouse that should probably maximum house 1,200 inmates that is housing 1,800 inmates. So already that's a recipe for disaster. Where you've got inmates sleeping on the floor.
Let me tell you, at least in my jail cell, that ain't comfortable, that floor.
No. And you're talking about rodents. You're talking about mold and mildew within the building itself, the fixtures itself, around the bathroom fixtures, mold and mildew. You're talking about rodents. You're talking about overcrowded community. And then you're talking about the heating problem that they had. It wasn't until Alderman Collins Muhammad went up and the media attention that was given to it after that they finally put in fans. But why, after community outcry, do you do the humane thing to do? And as Ty indicated, if you look at the number that's in there, that 16 to 1,800 that are in there, most of those people are people who have not even been to court. People who have not been convicted of anything. They've been charged. Some of these are traffic tickets. Most of them, the vast majority of them, are crimes of economics, non-violent crimes. So these are people who are in there being charged for traffic, for non-violent crimes, who have to wait. Sometimes their bond may be $75, it may be $100, the max may be $300, but now they have to wait. And so they're waiting for 3 months, they're waiting for 6 months, some waiting 18 months to go to trial. So what's going to happen in that 3 months? What's going to happen in 6, 12, or 18 months? They're going to become institutionalized. They're going to become products of their environment. If you put them in a criminal environment, they're going to become criminals. So that's what's going on, that the workhouse becomes a school of crime. And so they are now interacting and engaging with seasoned criminals, men who have been doing this all their life because that's all they know to do. And that's our fear. That's what we deal with. We talked to the superintendent there, the warden, who appears to be a good person, but even he will say, we don't have the resources to do what we want to do here. That's what he said, Reverend Gray. Give us the resources that we can put air conditioning and give us the resources so that we can add another wing so that we won't be overcrowded. But we're not being given the resources by the city to do what we need to do. Well, there's no profit in it. There's no profit. There's no profit in doing right. There's no profit in being humane. And so, but there has to be a willingness. And unfortunately, profit becomes the motivating factor. Well, there's no motivating factor here, except that it's the right thing to do. And so that's what happened when we visited the workhouse. And we'll continue to fight that fight. But we're talking about the workhouse is one, but the Justice Center is the other. And so you have to combine the two. And, that's part of the frontline fight. Once again, it's not just the verdict of Jason Stockley. It's the ongoing issues that we have to contend with. And we have to get black males back in the street. We have to get them out of jail. We have to get them back in the street. We have to make sure that there are reinsertion programs for them. The church has got to be involved. The community's got to be involved as a whole. And so that's part of Frontline saying we've got to come up with some creative solutions that are long-term and sustainable and not just a situation where we're relying on government. We have to make sure that we create an economic infrastructure so that we can begin to do self-determination, to be able to take care of our own. Because the oligarchy will never take care of the people. They will only take care of their own.
Lastly, got a lot of viewers around the country, frankly, around the world. I was surprised. I was in Germany a month ago, and I did a video live, and I walk out on the street, and someone stops me and was like, "Oh, I just saw you." I was like, "Damn, this is really worldwide." What can viewers do? I mean, most of them don't live in the area, so they might not be on the streets, but what can viewers, supportive, do to help your efforts?
Well, I mean, we have a jail support fund, and if you just hit us up on Facebook, it's #ExpectUs. Then you can go on our Facebook page. You can get information on jail support and how you can help. There's information as it relates to the mayor's phone number and the county executive's phone number. Sometimes it's just make a couple of calls, ask the question, what are you doing to end the protest? So #ExpectUs. Check that out. Hit us up. It'll let you know where we're going to be, the different protests and demonstrations and direct action that we're involved in, and just let us know. Let us know that you're thinking about us, and like I said, hit the mayor up. Call the mayor's office, St. Louis mayor. Just Google her number and give her a call, and she'll be happy to hear from you.
Can you do me a favor and just stress the importance of having a sort of universal legal assistance for people that can't afford it, and the means to be able to bail people out of jail while we're going, because we have people, you know, listening, and we want to make sure you guys have the resources that you need. But just like stress how important it is to be able to bail people out and to continue, because I'm sure it'll get to a point where they'll start trying to make sure people don't get out to be able to go back and protest.
I think, Ty, it's an excellent point. Our jail support program is critical. Without it, we would not be able to affect the kind of change that I think that we have. And you're absolutely right. You know, right now, a lot of these charges are misdemeanor charges. But the longer we're there, the more aggressive the police will be. And so the charges will become more serious charges, not that we're trying to get those charges, but we found that in this type of civil disobedience, assaulting a police officer is a quick charge. Resisting arrest is a quick charge. And these are felonies, and particularly in Missouri, where they have this new blue law, where police are put under a special category, it will become harder for us to get out, and that bail will become larger. And so it is critical. And as I said, if you hashtag expect us, go to our Facebook page. The website for jail support is on there. And there've been over 300 arrests so far. And there is the possibility of more to come. That if the mayor and the governor does not respond in more than just a piecemeal lip service way, then you'll see the intensity. And I can't predict what's going to happen. Frontline's going to have to determine that, and we'll support them. But please, hashtag expect us. There's a website there that will tell you how you can support jail support program. The jail support program, there is accountability there. There is transparency. We know exactly what's going on. It only goes to jail support. We work with our city defenders. They are a stand-up group of lawyers who make it a Herculean effort to get us out. You know, right now they can only detain us up to 24 hours, and they're pushing that. But as we move forward, the justice system has never been our friend, and as we move forward, it could very well become our enemy.
I want to end on 2 points, and thank you for so much time. Number one, this isn't about Ty or I, but I want to make sure people understand the importance of the journalist being arrested, because, you know, Ty and I, just due to he's in LA, I'm in New York, we kind of drop in and out of places. We try to cover as many places as possible. So there have been independent journalists without TYT behind them, without that name behind them, getting arrested here for the last 3 weeks. By my count, 6 others were arrested, plus Ty and I, the other night. So it's very common that police departments arrest independent journalists, not from CNN, the Washington Post, the New York Times, not from the prestigious corporate legacy media, because to the police, oh, fuck them. You know, they're just a bunch of hobos with cameras, you know? So they need your support. We need to keep the pressure on the St. Louis Police Department, whether you agree with the protests or not, whether it was a Young Turk or someone from Breitbart, a real right-wing site. You can't normalize journalists getting arrested. I think the story is really about the protesters. But if the journalists can't show you what's happening, you're not going to know what's happening, and you can't activate yourself to do something. If the legal observers who are not supposed to be arrested are being arrested, it's a blackout. And that's called authoritarian dictatorships. So as I really appreciate all the tweets and the messages and all that, but got to focus on, there's been, RebZ TV has been here from the beginning. STL News has been here, not just in the last 3 weeks, but before that. I'm sorry I don't know all of the rest that have been out. Once I find out, I'll definitely pass out that information. But it's about more than the Young Turks journalists being arrested. It's about journalists being arrested in St. Louis, in Ferguson, in Baltimore, in Standing Rock. If we don't have First Amendment, if we don't have media, then you guys, the oligarchy, essentially what that means is the oligarchy is going to do whatever the hell they want, and you don't have even a chance to know what the hell's going on, so you can peacefully dissent. So make sure you Ask your local representatives, local, state, federal. What do you think about journalists being arrested for covering events? Last time I checked, covering an event on the highway ain't against the law. And let me tell you, if it's the New York Times or CNN or one of these places, they'd be out in 2 seconds, and I don't even know if they'd be arrested in the first place. So that's important. Number two, I want to stress, like he said, I'm white. I'm not going to comment on Selma because I don't know the history as much as him. But this is not just St. Louis that this is going on. This is Detroit. This is Flint. This is Baltimore. This is Cleveland. Fill in your formerly middle-class city where gentrification and all these efforts have essentially driven black people and now white people to just severe poverty to the point where you don't have a choice. You're either going to feed your family or you're not. So we're in St. Louis right now because I can't be in 50 states at once, covering 50 states. But this is happening everywhere. And Eric Byler, my former cameraman, who was on the campaign trail with me, has done amazing work covering civil rights and abuse and police brutality. You could check out his playlist on youtube.com/2YTPolitics. Guy knows more about civil rights history than most white people I know. So we're in St. Louis. We're going to keep covering it. But just to make sure you know, St. Louis is a special case. But this kind of stuff, this police brutality, this public police really crossing over to privatization, it's happening everywhere. And it was happening before Trump, sorry to say. I know Ty thinks Obama's Black Jesus and everything. So because I want to honor my commitment, we're headed to East Chicago today. Going to follow up on the lead crisis there. Then we're going to head to Flint to follow up on that ongoing water crisis. We will be back. Trust me, we will be back in St. Louis. And whether we're here or not, we're going to be covering this. So thank you for watching. Previous videos are up on youtube.com/TYTPolitics. And thank you.
It's my pleasure.
Follow us at Jordan Chariton. If you want to be generous, Ty's arrest has, what are you up, 500 Twitter followers now?
I was talking about actually TYT.
Oh. Follow TYT Politics on Twitter, on Facebook, and Tommy_TYHEFE on the Twitter. Let's get him to 1,000 Twitter followers so he can stop bothering me. And I'm Jordan Chariton on Twitter. youtube.com/TYTPolitics. We're on our way to East Chicago. Thank you.